I work on pensions and general pensions policy, and it's a very interesting area of research and also relevant to policymakers. First, because as economists, we can use all the life cycle theory that we've been studying and apply this to pensions policy. Policymakers are really interested in pensions just because, well, there are going to be so many pensioners. By 2020, I think 28% of the UK population is going to be above the state pension age, so it's a big issue. And finally, most people watching this are going to, at some point, become a pensioner or perhaps are already pensioners. So it's relevant to everyone, really. People use pensions to ensure that they have a source of income later on in life when they are either unable to work or they don't want to work anymore. We should note that the private sector can provide these pensions and then ask why the government might want to intervene and provide a state pension. There are two reasons for this government intervention. First, the government might be concerned that people aren't saving enough for their own retirement. And second, the government might want to use the state pension to redistribute between different groups. So under our current pension system, the government is actually focusing on the second aim, that of redistributing across different groups of people. We have a system whereby higher earners make higher contributions and get out a fairly flat rate benefit, and lower earners or people who are unemployed or long-term disabled are credited with contributions and get a relatively generous state pension compared to the cash contributions that they have made. We used to have an earnings-related pension, which was the government's way of forcing people to save a certain amount. However, this has gradually been phased out as it became apparent that actually this was fairly expensive to provide. The earnings-related component will be finally phased out from 2016 when the government implements its latest reform to the state pension, the single-tier pension. Everyone reaching the state pension age after April 2016 will be affected by the government's proposed single-tier pension reform. And this is an attempt to simplify our existing state pension system so that there'll be one flat rate pension rather than our current rather complicated two-tier system, which is the basic state pension plus a semi-earnings related second-tier pension. This new single-tier pension will be roughly equal to £146 a week, and one will be able to accrue the full amount after 35 years of contributions or credits. In July 2013, myself and some colleagues released a report called A Single-Tier Pension, What Does It Really Mean?, where we looked at the short-run and the long-run effects of this reform. Looking at the short-run effects first, we linked survey data with official administrative data, where we actually had people's national insurance records. So we were able to calculate people's actual entitlement under the current system and compare that with our entitlement under the proposed reform. So comparing the entitlements under the two different systems, we were able to identify who was winning and who was losing from this reform. And we found that actually in the short run, there were lots and lots of winners. Women reaching the state pension age in the first 4 years after implementation were the most likely to win from the reform. They were likely to win on average £5 extra state pension a week. Also the long-term self-employed, we found that people with more than 10 years of self-employment would win on average £7.50 extra state pension income as a result of the reform. We find that in the long run, the effects are quite different. We find that actually, under the current system, the vast majority of people will be better off than they will be under the proposed system. This might be a reasonable policy response to the burden of an ageing population. The Office for Budgetary Responsibility forecasts that although we spend 5.4% of our national income on state pensions in 2012, in 50 years' time, in 2062, we'll actually spend 9.1% of our national income on state pensions without any reform. The single-tier pension reduces that long-run spending by 0.7% of national income. So although by 2062 we'll still be spending 8.4% of national income on the state pension, it looks like it'll be easier to meet that financial burden. So a reform that's actually taking place right now is the increase of the female state pension age to equal the male state pension age by 2018, and then the increase of both the male and the female state pension ages from 65 right up to 68 by the middle of this century. When the basic state pension was first introduced in 1948, the female state pension age was 60 and the male state pension age was 65. At those ages, life expectancy for a woman was 18 years and life expectancy for a man was 12 years. Since then, life expectancies have increased, and so the cost of paying out those pensions has also increased. Women can actually now expect to live for 7 years longer than they could before, and men can now expect to live for 6 years longer. And those 7 and 6 years represent 7 and 6 years more state pension payouts. So in response, the last Labour government actually announced plans to increase the state pension age to 68 by the middle of the century. This is on top of a set of reforms announced in 1995, which were meant to equalise the male and female state pension ages. And they were actually driven by the need to treat men and women equally within the state pension system. There's been some IFS research looking at the effects of this. There are two ways in which increasing the state pension system might save the government money. The first is through fewer years of state pension to pay out. The second is if there's a huge labour supply response. So in response to not being able to claim a state pension until later, people might choose to work more and maybe contribute more taxes to the government. So Soumaya research done by some of my colleagues looked at the impact of increasing the female state pension age from 60 to 61. And they found that actually this increased both labour supply and also decreased the amount of benefits that had to be paid out, and actually saving the Exchequer overall £2.1 billion, or 1.14% of national income. They found that most of this effect in savings was actually due to fewer benefits paid out rather than a huge labour supply response. But this bodes well for the public finances in terms of future increases of the state pension age. Under the single-tier proposals, people will receive £146 of state pension income a week. That represents about a third of median earnings. And so if people were only to rely on the state pension income at retirement, then they might actually see their income drop to a third of what it was when they were in work. If they want their income to drop by less, then they're going to have to save privately. And the government has actually reformed the private pensions sector recently, encouraging people to do this saving. The main reform has been auto-enrolment recently, which draws on the neat behavioural economics insight that people like the default option. And so the government has made the default option saving into a private pension account. Initial results of this reform indicate that actually fewer people have been opting out of their automatically enrolled pension than people were expecting. And so we might think that actually this is quite a successful reform. But we need to wait until it's been fully rolled out to think about the actual impact.